Worlds has come and gone, but Standard keeps rolling on. Well, just like your mom. I couldn't help it. I'm sorry.
We got Medsphere Dreads. Comment below as we walk through Week 5 of Duskmourn Standard. What a week it was. We got to watch the best and the brightest in this community battle it out for the highest honor this game can bestow. There's a ton to dissect, but first, let's note that we reviewed not just Worlds, but 7 other major tournaments from this past week, though a heavy emphasis was given to results at Worlds because we will always give deference to an all-pro field.
Absolutely, and Dimir Demons came out on top thanks to expert piloting by Javier Dominguez, our 30th world champion. What an honor. Outside of Worlds, nobody was really ready to pilot the Demon Brew, so there were only 2 copies in the top 8 of Worlds, and 1 copy across all 7 other major tournaments. But when you win Worlds, you win the tier list for the week, I say.
Yeah, I'm with you there, Max. Like, you win Worlds, that's the tier list right there. You won the best tournament you can with the best competition. Now, next up is Golgari Midrange, with 11 out of 64 possible top 8 slots going to Glissa and friends. That's right, folks, more than 15% of the field that made top 8 over the weekend was Golgari Midrange, and I don't expect that to slow down anytime soon, because that was Unholy Annex's coming out party.
Oh yeah, it was. Mono Red Aggro surprised everyone, snapping up 8 top 8 slots, a top 4 at Worlds, and a trophy this past week. Screaming Nemesis ironically had a quiet coming out party and put the world on notice that Red ain't dead.
Dimir Aggro came in 4th with 10 top 8s, including 2 at Worlds and a trophy of its own. The builds are still varying heavily, but there is no denying that this is an archetype that can adapt and conquer.
Rounding out Tier 1 is Gruul Slickshot. Now, honestly, after day 1 with Jean-Manuel Duprat's undefeated record, we were all but certain that Leyline was going to hit this tournament like a wrecking ball. We'd be crowning Duprat once more, but the bird got shot out of the sky on day 2, landing the former world champion at a 6-2 finish in Constructed that kept him out of the top 8. Still, the bird made the top 8 of Worlds in the hands of Yoshihiko Ikawa and snagged another 8 top 8s elsewhere, along with the trophy, which is good enough for Tier 1 this week.
Kicking off Tier 2 is Azorius Cookies, sneaking 2 top 8s in a trophy despite not being brought to Worlds this year. Now, it's hard to know if this deck is good or opponents are simply unprepared for it given how rarely it shows up, but results are results and we keep rolling.
They sure are. Speaking of results, Zur Domain also climbed into Tier 2, supplanting Atraxa builds and racking up 4 top 8s of its own over the weekend, though, again, it wasn't around much at Worlds.
Azorius Oculus was our biggest letdown of the weekend as the much-anticipated Shota revamp didn't go as planned, and in the end only 2 top 8s happened at other tournaments. Still, the eye in the sky continues to make waves on the ladder, and there's plenty of time between now and the next major tournament for some brewing and some revisions.
Last but not least, we have Temur Prowess, another much-anticipated brew that was expected to have a breakout performance over the weekend, but fell short, snagging 5 top 8s elsewhere, but nothing at Worlds. However, a single pilot took down 2 MTGO challenges over the weekend, so it still managed a couple trophies. Nonetheless, we're leaving it in Tier 2 for now as we wait to see next weekend's results.
Over in Brewer's Corner, I've got Is It Control and Bring a Reanimator to show off.
And I'll be highlighting Simic Oculus and Temur Spells. But first, let's kick off our tier list archetypes breakdown with world champion Javier Dominguez's Dimir Demons.
Alrighty, folks, so Javier Dominguez made a deal with the Demon, and boy did it pay off. Lily the Veil is looking on in envy right now, especially from the sideboard there. Now, let's dive in and talk about why this is the best build of Demon so far. Now, you have the alt win with this Doomsday Excruciator into either Jace or Restless Reef, and really Restless Reef is what allowed this deck to move as far as it did, because if you were relying on hitting Jace with a Doomsday, odds weren't great, but when you have 4 different lands that do this, you can line it up nicely. Now, this has a ton of early interaction. We're talking 10 removal spells, 2 counters, 4 discard spells. This is about ripping apart the early game plan and landing a big fat creature or card drawing engine that leads to a big fat creature. And that's really the depth of what this deck is trying to do. It's saying the early game in a format that's so heavily dominated by aggression, we're going to control that. We're going to control the pacing until we can land something that's too big for them to handle. And if they handle the first one, we'll get to the next one. And that's what this deck is doing, and that's why it was so good for that tournament.
Okay, that makes a ton of sense, but I have to ask, Do you think this particular mill-friendly version of the deck will continue to win events all the way until Foundations in 2.5 weeks, or do you think the deck will morph by then?
It's going to morph. I think this was a very smart, very clever build for Worlds exactly. I don't expect it to do well on the ladder. I've already seen people trying it on the ladder and failing. I've already tried it on the ladder and had issues. People are ready for it now. Like it's great when you're on the coming out wave of a archetype because people aren't really sure how to play against it and they don't really understand what you're trying to do necessarily. So you get a lot of free wins on their mistakes. But once everybody's tested against an archetype, you start to see some of the weaknesses. And there are definitely weak points to this Dimir Demons lid. So we'll see how it goes, but I don't think it's going to stay the way it is at all.
That's also what I thought, even watching this deck during Worlds. I was thinking, of course this is going to be on ladder the next day. But yeah, through my testing, I found it didn't do as well as I thought it could. Definitely displaying the difference between regional metas and sort of an overall big meta, like on Arena Ladder. Yeah, I also suspect this deck will morph. But let's talk about a deck that has morphed already, Golgari Midrange.
Marcio Carvalho made it all the way to the finals of this year's World Championship before getting taken down by yet another demon list. Now, clearly, his deal with the demons was subpar, and let's talk about why. So, I love this list. This is actually my favorite list to come out of Worlds. I like it more than the Dimir Demons list. It's got one fewer annex, which I'm not really sure about, because if you're going to go in on demons, I feel like you're going 4-ofs or you're going 0-ofs, right? Like, these unholy annexes stack well with each other, because you need that many demons. So I'm not sure why we're playing Sentinel of the Nameless City over the 4th NX, but that's the first shift I'd be making in this. Outside of it, we're looking again, heavy emphasis on the early game. You are trying to control tempo. That turn 1, turn 2, we are all about trying to control tempo. And it just grinds through with Mosswood Dread Knights, Broncos, Glissa. So you have all this card advantage built in. You essentially have somewhere between 13 to 14 card advantage engines built into a demons list that has a ton of removal on the front end. And that's just going to be difficult for a lot of people to deal with. But whether this is stronger than going blue, well, the finals told that tale once. We'll see if it shifts over the next few weeks.
Yeah, I feel like there's a huge mid-range fight between Golgari and Dimir right now on the ladder. But my question for you, is it still advisable to be using 8 2-drop creatures in this list when we've still got Torch the Tower, Anoint with Affliction, still seeing heavy play?
Yes, because all of them are essentially creatures that start running away with a game if they don't have the right removal spell at the right time. And using those removal spells there means they don't have them for Glissa, and that's important to me. That we have a scenario where they're like, okay, we're going to use Anoint with Affliction on your Mosswood. Fantastic, land Glissa. Do you have another removal spell? No? Fantastic. We're taking over the game now. And that's the point. You're like all of your early creatures, all of those card advantage engines are just sitting there saying, you have to match up with your answers correctly to each individual threat. And if you can't do that, we start to tempo, we start to snowball the game state. And that's why that list is so difficult to deal with.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about a list that came from a newcomer to Worlds, made it to the top 8. Mono Red Aggro.
Well, not everybody wanted to make deals with demons. Quintanol made to the semifinals of Worlds on the back of 12 mice and Screaming Nemesis, giving up Slickshot for a good curve and sticky top-end threat that ends all hope of life gain quickly. Now, I think the unsung hero of this list is probably that there's 4 Rockface villages sitting here, and when you have 12 mice, this looks really, really good, especially when you also have the 4 Hired Claws, right? So the ability to get to the mid-game and start scaling your threats, start making everything have haste, that makes it very difficult for a lot of the format to deal with you because they can't safely tap out to develop their board position for fear that you're just going to run them the hell over. And you're going to. Like, you get up to, 24 haste creatures once you have Rockface rolling? That's so much haste. That's so much haste. And Screaming Nemesis, I get. I'm assuming in testing they played against enough life gain that they're like, okay, Slickshot's cute, but we need to have something that just ends that threat. And let's not forget that you can just shock your own Nemesis, ping them for 2, and end the life gain right there, too.
Oh, yeah, taking out life gain, that's a huge buffer against most of the decks that use life gain to mitigate what red can do. My question for you, and what's going to be on everyone's minds and what was on our minds going into Worlds, no ley lines. Is this correct for Mono Red?
For Mono Red, yes. I think we can affirmatively state we don't want it for Mono Red. Gruul's a whole nother thing, and we'll get to that in a couple of decks. But for Mono Red, I think the point of Mono Red is that you are playing hasty, curved out, excellent threats that scale. And that's what this deck does. You have Heartfire Heroes scaling, you have Hired Claw scaling, you've got Emberheart Challenger scaling, and you've got things like Screaming Nemesis to sit there at the top of the curve and go, you can't block it. You just can't block it. You can't afford to go down that path. You have to be so far ahead to block it, and you're never ahead against that red deck. And that's why it's so clever the way it's positioned. So I don't think you want Leyline here. You're not really playing pump spells. You're trying to establish hasty threats so that if they tap out to play their own, you just blow out their threat, and now you're swinging through for an extra 4 to 6 points right there.
Yeah, I feel like this version of Mono Red is going to be very tempting to want to play on ladder. Out of the decks that we're showing from Worlds, this one's probably one of the better candidates for going on ladder and grinding, just based on the way it's made up right now. You won't have to make too many adjustments, but let's talk about another contender, Dimir Aggro.
So Max Rappaport made it to the top 8 with Dimir Aggro along with Kai Buddha. Now, each list is different by multiple slots, but this is the best performing Dimir list in terms of raw constructed point totals at 6 and 2, so we're using this instead of Kai's list. I know many of you are sitting there like, no, no, this is the one that performed the best, that's why it gets the credence, right? So let's look at how this one's designed. We're not going up the scale for a full playset of Enduring Curiosities, and we're hedging with Shelly in the main, which is kind of intriguing because most of the lists you're going to see are going to have 3 Shellys in the sideboard, and they're using that as a way to post-board, get a solid life gain threat in against these Slickshot decks, etc. But in the main board, most of them are on a quad Enduring Curiosity, so you can grind in that Dimir v Golgari or Dimir v Temur matchup, right? And this is kind of that fine mix between the two, where they're saying, all right, we don't want to hedge too hard in either direction. We've still got, card advantage built in with Gix and Enduring. We've also got life gain over here. It's an interesting way to build it, and clearly it panned out for them. But there's so much to cover when it comes to Dimir Aggro, so I would say if you're a Coffee and Grinder member, check it out. I may have done way too much writing today, and I have a whole thing on Dimir Aggro and how to design that deck and how to build it sitting there for you. If you aren't a Coffee and Grinder member and you want to be, this is a good reason to go, because believe me, I wrote like 7 pages on why Dimir Aggro should be constructed the way it is.
Okay, sounds good. Everybody go check that out. Definitely want to join Coffee and Grinders. You get your value out of that for sure, as many people in the Rebellion can attest. But my question for you, and you kind of touched on it already, even if you don't want the full set of Enduring Curiosity, is 2-to-1 split between Shelly and Enduring Curiosity correct exactly?
Really hard to say. Personally, I don't necessarily like to go in either direction, and it's a question of tempo, right? If you are going with Enduring Curiosity, what you are doing is you're saying, we are going to play a Kaido Enduring game plan. We're not going to play the Demon game plan, which is the other route you can go. And then you have to pick between Shelly and Enduring, and that's a question of how hard you want to hedge against aggro. So that's how that breaks down in that pyramid, essentially. And a 2-to-1 Shelly to Enduring, I think, is correct if you're expecting a lot of mono red, if you're expecting a fair amount of Oculus as well, because they rely so heavily on card draw, and Shelly really burns them out fast. It's wild how quickly that happens. But turning their Chart a Course into take 4 damage is a big deal. So if you're expecting a meta like that, where it's very aggressive, yeah, Shelly in the main for sure. If you expect all the grind fest, Enduring's where you want to be.
Yeah, we expected Shelly to come back into relevance as the card advantage wars have raged in Standard. So, yeah, check your local metas and prepare appropriately. That's all we can say on that one. But let's talk about the final list in our Tier 1 archetypes. Gruul Slickshot.
All right, folks. Last week, I expounded on why Leyline wasn't the right move, and then Jean-Emmanuel Duprat went undefeated on day 1, and I knew I'd have to acknowledge that Leyline has legs in BO3, even if we all really wanted it to die quietly in a corner somewhere while we played interactive Magic with lower variants. Now, true to form, Leyline showed that it has ups and downs, narrowly missing a top 8 despite a solid 6-2 record in the tournament. However, we're looking at Yoshihiko Ikawa's list because they made top 8 without the Leyline, and that's the highest performing list right there, okay? So, this isn't that different from the norm. One of the few pieces that are worth pointing out here, there's only 2 Might of the Meek. There's, however, 7 removal spells in the main. That's 4 Shock, 2 Torch the Tower, and a Scorching Shot. Clearly, this was prepped for an aggro v aggro meta. They expected the mirror, they expected it often. And if they weren't going to be playing against the mirror, if you look at that sideboard, 3 O-Bolts, 2 Scorching Shots, they expected Dimir and Golgari in numbers, because that's what those are there for. The piece that I think they potentially missed on was that they don't have an amazing game plan against the demon lists, and they're relying on those pop hatch formations and perhaps the Urbrask's forges to do the heavy lifting there. But it's a rough matchup from what I can tell.
Okay. I'm starting to notice a trend here that just the 2 copies of Snakeskin Veil, and a Snakeskin Veil is the card that gives me the most trouble when I'm facing this archetype. So I typically expect 4 every time I see it on in a match. Is 2 Snakeskin Veil in the main board correct?
So this is an interesting question, right? Because it's very dependent on the removal that your opponent's playing. If you get to a point where Slickshot's taking over and they're playing 4 Snakeskin Veil, everybody's just going to board in Nowhere to Runs. We're just going to switch over the removal, we're going to play Nowhere to Run, and all of a sudden you have dead slots, right? But if you only play a couple copies, then you get into that, like, do we really want to hedge with Nowhere to Run? Boy, that seems like a lot. Maybe we don't want to go that far. And all of a sudden they become potent again. And I think that's why they split the difference with exactly 2 copies, is by saying it's good, but you don't have room to sideboard against it because it's only a 2 of. And I think that's why they went this way.
Okay, that seems right to me. Definitely a good reason to want to hedge versus going all in. Yeah, okay. All right, the potency of the pros on display at Worlds, and we see it in these builds and just the little nuances between each version and the versions that we see on ladder. Really makes all the difference. So thank you for that analysis. I'm going to kick off tier 2 by talking about Azorius Cookies. So Cookies is one of those decks that consistently slips under the radar while taking down the occasional tourney. This past weekend was no different, with Lavunga 21 smashing through a 58-player MTGO challenge on Friday with those Zoetic glyphs. So let's talk about it. I want to point out the 4 Mockingbirds. Honestly, the best application for me when I see this card is copying the Bunnicorns and having 8 Bunnicorns total. That snowball effect is wild. 4 copies of Steel Seraph, providing the needed life gain that you're going to need against red-based decks. And Unidentified Hovership, little known card, not seeing a ton of play, but I want to highlight this because I think there's the possibility here that you could just convert this over to 3 copies of Hovership. It does kind of act like a removal vehicle all in one. So maybe we play 3 of these instead of the 2 Schooners that we see, but you do see 2 copies of Schooner here in this version. 4 Sheltered by Ghost, very interesting card. I love the application against Mono Red. Get rid of the Screaming Nemesis, so your Steel Seraphs can still provide life gain. Yeah, so Azorius Cookies, we're going to see whether this deck is competitive or not in the coming weeks. I suspect it's just flying under the radar is really the reason we're not seeing it played that often.
That's fair. Now, I look at this, and what is holding it back from being tier 1 in your opinion?
So, there's still a lot of enchantment hate present in the meta, especially in the green-based decks. We're seeing green-based decks everywhere, whether it's Domain, Control, Golgari especially. Very, very potent. And also, we're starting to see copies, like the advice we gave last week, 4 copies of Duress in main boards for some decks, really starting to wreak havoc on those starting hands and really prevent some of what this deck wants to do. So, yeah, enchantment hate combined with 4 Duresses being in starting hands tends to mitigate Azorius Cookies just a bit.
So my takeaway is Golgari Midrange just absolutely closing the door on Azorius Cookies, and can you really afford to have that be an auto loss in this format? Fair. Yeah. Alrighty, let's move it on to something that should do a little bit better against Golgari Midrange. Domain.
So, while Domain didn't do well at Worlds, it really wasn't that present. Nyctophobia was one of several pilots to make various MTGO Challenge top 8s over the weekend with it, eschewing the traditional Atraxa build even to embrace the Overlords in conjunction with Zur. So let's dive into what's different here. First thing you're going to notice, 2 copies of Overlord, the Flood Pits. This has been happening, trending in the last couple of weeks, maybe the last week and a half, replacing the 4th copy of the White Overlord and the 4th copy of Herd Migration. I think the reason for this kind of shift is it really provides a decent way to get through your library, really find what you need, really find the removal that you need, the board wipes that you need for certain situations. We've also got 2 copies of a card that we haven't seen that often, Scroll Shift. This can reactivate your Overlords that you've already cast for the impending cost and really draw you an extra card as well. Even better also if you have the Beanstalk out, because you get a reactivation of the Impending Overlord. No Atraxas in the deck. They don't want to wait till turn 7 to really find their cards. You really do get card advantage along the way with Beanstalk. It's a Bean stack now. Turn 6, turn 7 is just too slow. So, yeah. Few little changes for Zur Domain.
Fair. And I mean, I love the scroll shift. It's so spicy in the sense that you get just overlords out faster when you need to, especially with like the white overlord, where you're just, all right, so get a couple 2/1s, chump block, scroll shift. Now there's a 6/6 and 2 more 2/1s. That seems spicy. I also love that it protects against like Terra Sunder. If you hold up the 3 mana, they go to remove it, and you're like, yeah, no, we're gonna have it anyway. So I love that. But you know, I look at a list like this. Where does it traditionally struggle, in your opinion?
So we just talked about scroll shift and how that kind of mitigates against what Golgari wants to do. Golgari being kind of one of the bigger popular decks right now, but it does still struggle when it comes to aggro, light aggro. It goes right underneath it when it loses. Typically by turn 4, turn 5, Mono Red, Gruul have figured it out. Oculus is also included in this list. So all those decks have plans to beat Domain by turn 4. When this deck stumbles also, it stumbles really badly. If you don't line up your mana just right for the temporary lockdown to get rid of aggro, then it can be pretty bad. And specifically Mono Red leaps on that advantage there. So yeah, light aggro is probably the reason.
And I mean, I've heard it said before in the past, Max, that Domain is the best deck to curve with and the worst deck to stumble with. And that is how it has always felt for me. Like, if you get the curve with Domain, you're like, we're playing a different format. I'm playing Modern and you're playing Standard. And you stumble and you're like, I'm playing Limited, actually, and it's not going well. So,
yeah, exactly.
Alrighty, with that, let's move it on to Azorius Oculus.
So we all saw Eli Cassis and Shota on this over the weekend, and someone assumed at least one copy was going to make it to the top 8, but alas, none did, landing Oculus into Tier 2. And as it didn't manage much of a presence outside of Worlds either, this is the list that we went with. Shown here is Eli's list, so let's discuss it. The first thing is the tension between Soul Partition versus Get Lost. Which do you want? Soul Partition, I want to point out, has the additional added bonus of targeting cards like Forge and other artifacts that you tend to still see in the red-based decks. So, don't scoff at that, even though Get Lost, you like it because it targets enchantments quite a bit. But if you're seeing a meta with a lot more of that mono red, maybe this has a better application. Founding the Third Path is kind of new for the list. It does add some velocity, add some quickness to getting the Oculus out, to getting your cards out there, the ones that you want to reanimate in particular. We have 2 copies of Split Up in the sideboard. This card is starting to see more play, so beware of that, beware of attacking into that. And then I also noticed the shift over to 2 copies of Negate over Phantom or 3 Steps. Now I just want to caution everybody, Negate is not going to counter any of the overloads. I know they're enchantments, but they're still creatures when they're on the stack, even when you cast them for the impending cost. So be wary of what kind of counterspell you want to apply here in Oculus.
Oh yeah, you want Disdainful Stroke. That still counters them at 3 mana, weirdly. But
Yep.
now we all saw this. If you were watching Worlds, you got to see Oculus get blown out by Mono Red. How do we fix that matchup, Max?
There's definitely tools. You can go into more copies of, into the Flood Maw. Flood Pit's Drowner is also an option at 2. As far as Dispersal, I just mentioned that Split Up is seeing more play. So all of these are options. I would suggest going into those a little bit more heavily if you're seeing, heavy mono red meta. You want to focus more on tempoing that opponent rather than destroying their creatures outright. It'll delay their ability to kill you, and they'll waste their resources trying to pump up, their stuff while you're just, bouncing. So that really does waste their card advantage in the beginning of the game. So yeah, I would aim more towards tempoing, aim more towards some of those cards, perhaps in your sideboard, perhaps in your main board.
And I think that really speaks to the dynamic of the matchup. Like the ability to bounce back their creatures is giving you almost a time walk effect, sometimes a 2-for-1 card advantage when they're playing pump spells, and it gets them into a place where they have to deal with an unpumped Heartfire hero versus your giant Oculus, and you get to just take over once you get to turn 4. So I see what you mean. We're not necessarily trying to blow up the world. We're just trying to time walk them a few times so we can get going. So that makes sense. Now let's get to a deck that, I mean, everybody's got a weird opinion on this one. I have no idea where we're going to land on it by the end of the season, but here's Temur Prowess.
Temur Prowess. So going into Worlds, this was touted as a potential breakout contender. A lot of people were, in the Rebellion even, were, very excited to see this list present. But the best record was this list by Ryan Condon that went 6-2. Now, while CFT SOC 3 won 2 MTGO challenges with their version of the deck, we're going to stick with the World's results as our baseline for it. So let's discuss. You're saying Song of Totentons. I just want to point that card out. Enduring Vitality, which is going to make your creatures able to tap for any color mana. This town ain't big enough. And Storm Changer's Talent. Combination of these cards can result in tons of mana output and tons of prowess triggers that can basically snowball quickly. You want to be able to cast your Steaming Sauna for card advantage early under this sort of scheme, putting out a ton of creatures to be able to tap and then cast that side of the room card. You've also got 2 Up the Beanstalks taking advantage of that play, drawing off This Town Ain't Big Enough and Steaming Sauna. The sideboard, however, I want to note, probably needs a little bit of tuning. It is kind of all over the place. You've got 2 dissection tools in there, 1 copy of Pyroclasm, so I think we need to solidify that a little more. But other than that, the deck is definitely a challenger.
I mean, I love Dissection Tool in the sense that this really is a build a Baneslayer vibe, and you've got those tokens off, those otter tokens that you're totally happy to sacrifice to pump up a different otter token. So I can see where Dissection Tool is just kind of a wild card to put in it. But Max, I look at this list and I'm like, can this deck actually keep up against the aggressive decks in the format, or does it just take too long to set up,
I think it really relies on your starting hand, right? Like, mulligan aggressively with this deck because you need the right set of cards to really get set up quickly. Like I said, it requires a near perfect hand. That worries me when it comes to consistency with a given deck. Stumbling, for example, like we talked about Domain, can mean certain death against Mono Red Aggro. So, be wary of those matchups. I don't know. I believe this list is probably going to morph before Foundations, but there's definitely some necessary pieces present already.
Fair. And that's going to take us into my favorite segment every week, Brewer's Corner. Alrighty, folks, we're going to go ahead and kick things off. Max, talk to us about Simic Oculus.
All right, so Simic Oculus. Credit to Athena the Bun from the MTG Rebellion Discord for this. With access to green in an Oculus deck, you've got access to Seed of Hope and Cache Grab, which are really going to help you with your self-milling. Don't Make a Sound is you can think of that as sort of like a make disappear counterspell with a Surveil upside in case it does get, the extra cost is paid. Also, what I love about this deck and what I want to talk about is the 4 Hauntwood Shrieker. This is a list that finally makes use of that card. We were drooling over this card during preview season, but it never showed up in any of the competitive lists. Here we see possibly the best application of the card in a list that's focusing around Manifesting Dread, flipping those creatures easily. So definitely a big shout out for making this card useful. We've got 2 copies of Valgavoth's Onslaught in the sideboard. This can come in as basically Herd Migration at home, but you've got the Manifesting Dread upside of it, so it works well with the Hauntwood Shrieker. Say Its Name, 4 copies of, helping you with the mill, but also getting that neat little Altanac combo that comes in the back door and just surprises your opponent. 9/9 Trample is nothing to scoff at, so definitely check this list out.
It's a spicy number. I got to give it a little bit of time on the ladder because I'm just intrigued to see if Dread is a thing. I love what you said about Valgavoth's Onslaught. Like, we have Herd Migration at home. 100% how that feels. Yes. Alrighty, we're gonna move things along and talk a little bit about Izzet Control. All right, credit to Jim Davis. I believe that was the originator of this archetype. So the idea here is we're just trying to control the early game. As you can see, we've got plenty of removal. We got a little bit of bounce. We got some counter spells. We're just trying to kind of filter through and build our graveyard out so that Capricious Hellraiser gets down to exactly 3 red mana. And if we can, what we'd really like is to get to a scenario where it goes ahead and gets a Season of Weaving, because you get to create copies of Capricious Hellraiser that then go grab more. And as you can see, this chain ends up with multiple Capricious Hellraisers. You get to the point where these Bitter Reunions give them all haste, and you just swing in for 20 in 1 turn. So I've seen this pop off a few times. It's really good. This is also one of my favorite lists because it gets to run Chandra, Hope's Beacon, and I have wanted this card to be good for so long. And the last time it was, well, the card it was good with got banned because everybody was sick of Invoke Despair hitting twice. So I don't know if it's going to be an amazing deck by any means. Clearly, he decided not to take it to Worlds, but it's spicy. It's got some room to maneuver. I'm curious to see if anybody can crack it.
All right, very cool. We love spicy lists, and Jim Davis is, one of the best that comes up with those spicy lists. So yeah, very cool, very cool. Let's move on now and talk about a deck that's been popping up on the MTG Arena ladder that we just have to talk about and discuss: Temur Spells. So Temur Spells, I just want to point out, this is probably one of the best lists for having a sideboard 4 copies of Pyroclasm. I still like Pyroclasm. I'm still on that card. I think it should see more play considering the aggro is still pretty heavy in the meta right now. And you really do get to find that one mountain that you need that comes in off the sideboard with Brave the Wilds, Analyze Pollen, and Bushwhack. That's 9 total spells that will help you find that mountain. We've got also Storm Chaser's Talent in here, Eddie Merc Crab, and Tolarian Terror. These are going to make up your offense for this deck. Eddie Merc Crab in particular, with, This Town Ain't Big Enough, can really tempo an aggressive opponent, keep their creatures tapped and useless, and then you just come in and, wreck with the Tolarian Terror. So I like what this list is trying to do. In particular, you've got the Up the Beanstalk as well here that's, going to be able to draw you more off of a really cheap Tolarian Terror. That's a frightening combination right there. So I like where this list is placed for the aggro heavy meta.
And I mean, Up the Beanstalk, when all of your 5+ CC spells are actually 1 or 2, feels amazing. So I like how they push that in there. Initially, when I saw it, I'm like, what the hell are they running this? And then, oh, right, you'll just keep bouncing Eddie Mercs back with the, what was it? This Town Ain't Big Enough. And that's 2 draws right there, at least. So, God, it's better than I thought it would be. It's frustrating as hell to play against. I'll just put that out there. But
yeah, it is.
With that, we're going to move to our final deck in Brewer's Corner, the Bringer Reanimator. Alrighty, so credit to Red of the MTGR Discord. Thanks for sending the list. It's Reanimator list, folks. That's what we're doing here. We are trying to rock out Invasion of Amonkhet and flip it with cards like Render Inert and get to a place where, we're copying Vein Rippers, we're tossing in Bringers. There's so much to do with this list, and I'm still kind of curious to see how Vein Ripper plays out with Bringer, because sacrifice all the creatures you control, then bring them all back seems pretty good when your sacrifice trigger is -2/+2 on life. That's quite something. So I haven't actually gotten a chance to mess around with this on the ladder yet, but I like that the sideboard is also embracing Ephara's Dispersal and saying we need to be surveilling. I think we're going to see this in Oculus as well as we move forward. It's so efficient. It's so efficient. It's such a great way to get to that turn 2 reanimation in Oculus. I can imagine it's great in here as well, where we're just trying to find targets for Invasion of Amonkhet and keep pushing forward.
Dimir's in a pretty strong place right now. I mean, you have access to Into the Flood Maw. You still have access to Deep Cavern Bat. Really, the early disruption I find pretty useful. What I like about this list, though, is one of my favorite combinations, which is Invasion of Amonkhet into a couple copies of Aquazotz, because that makes your Aquazotz pretty much unkillable. It just keeps coming back. So, very cool little list. I appreciate that.
Alrighty, and that's going to bring us to our final segment, Ahead of the Curve. Now, Max, we looked at 13 archetypes in our recap. What are you playing going into Week 6 of Duskmourn Standard?
I like where Golgari is placed, so I chose Golgari Demons. First off, I want to say you were dead on earlier talking about the Worlds version of the list. I think for the ladder, for your tournament meta, I think for Unholy Annex, you just got to go all the way. Stacking these can be just downright oppressive when you have a single Bloodletter out on the board. Make it 2, and oh my gosh, you're doing a ton of damage per turn. You're getting back a ton of life against those Red and Gruul Slickshot decks. 3 copies of Duress for the same reason that we talked about 4. You want that early disruption. You want to get rid of the stuff that they're going to remove your demons with. Now, 2 slashers, because I don't want to over rely on this card. I've made mistakes with having 4 copies of this in there. There's still Anoint with Affliction. There's still Torch the Tower. But you know, it's a must answer threat. It's a sticky threat, so I do like a couple of copies here. I also hedge with 2 copies of Bronco into the 2 Glisses. Bronco is a bit awkward because you don't have anything to really pilot it. Glissa does, of course, so we're going to rely on a couple copies here for extra card advantage. And then the 3 Anoint with Afflictions in the sideboard, that's a must-have right now. And don't ditch the Deep Cavern Bat. I've been seeing some people ditch that card in Golgari. I still think it's very useful in the mirror with other Golgari lists, and especially with the Dimir Demons list. You can really disrupt your opponent there in that mirror match.
Fair, fair. I mean, it's a spicy list, and I'm kind of curious to see how that Bloodletter plays out for Golgari. I think that's probably the biggest flex slot in your list that I've seen. But, I mean, if you're right, you're right. You know what I mean? Like, if that really pans out well, given where the meta's at, if everybody's on Anoint with Afflictions, and you're like, here's a 4CC spell, you don't have the removal. Because, I mean, think about it. You've got Arcfiend, you've got Bloodletter. Do you have 8 go for the throats? You don't. You have 4. So naturally, they're going to run out of removal before you run out of threats, as long as you can keep the game moving. So I see exactly where you're aiming for, that sweet spot where you get right behind all the removal. That's fantastic. Now, the list I went is the other end of the spectrum in what I think will be the head-to-head of the season. Dimir going against Golgari, so to speak, and here is Dimir.
Yep.
Alrighty, folks, like I said, coffee and grinders. We have the sideboard guide already propped up, and I have like 3 different builds of this that I'm testing out. This is one of them. This has done well for me. I'm in the top 1,000 of Mythic with it on the ladder. I can tell you that there's a few mistakes people are making. I think the first one is playing Fountain Port instead of Drannith Ruins. Drannith Ruins is insane when you get to the mid-game. For those of you who have never played with Preacher plus Drannith Ruins before, try swinging with this, getting a 1-1 and making it a 3-3 lifelinker every turn. You're going to become a believer really fast. Let's also note that a lot of Dimir's threats as the game goes on are pretty lackluster. Spyglass Siren on turn 6, kind of shitty. But if you add Drannith Ruins, now you've got a 3-3 flyer. That's not bad. Same with Fairy Mastermind turning into a 4-3 on their turn, and Deep Cavern Bat turning into a 3-3. So you have the ability to scale like you never got to in the past. So I'm a believer in Drannith Ruins over Fountain Port. I think that's the biggest distinction I can make, because you're going to see versions of this list. You're going to see a ton of them. One of them just won a challenge yesterday. So it's going to be interesting to see how this list evolves. But Drannith Ruins, guys, try it out. I think you'll enjoy.
I'm a believer. I watched your stream the other day where you played with it, and I'm a believer. I think 3-3 lifelink is nothing to scoff at. That's going to be super useful. But that's all we have for you today. Another week in the books, folks. Thank you for supporting us, and a special shout out to our members who support the Rebellion by watching these videos all the way through. We will definitely be back next week with more analysis.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment on this video. Every single click helps. We appreciate you watching it through all the way to the end. And until next time, Rebels, untap, upkeep, resist.